Human space, the final frontier, they say. But what if I told you that humanity is not the first to walk the stars? What if, in some forgotten corner of the cosmos, there are forces older than time itself, watching, waiting, and remembering why the universe began? The truth is, the vast reaches of space may not be as empty as we once thought, and there are secrets buried within its secrets. Humanity is only beginning to scratch the surface of in this story. We follow a group of explorers, a daring crew, composed of scientists, engineers, and the best humanity has to offer, who are about to come face to face with the unimaginable. They're on a mission to discover something that's been lost to time, an ancient forgotten relic of creation itself. But what they don't know is that their very existence might be at risk, not from hostile alien life or malfunctioning technology, but from something far deeper, far more fundamental. As their ship enters the uncharted expanse of space, they encounter an anomaly, a void in the fabric of reality, something that shouldn't exist, a space that is off limits, not just to human life, but to creation itself. For ages, this region has been avoided, abandoned by civilizations far more advanced than our own. And yet, humanity presses on, unaware that they may be stepping into a trap set by the universe itself. Because the very moment they approach it, something stirs, something ancient, powerful, and utterly unforgiving. The story doesn't just revolve around space travel or scientific discovery. At its heart, it's a tale about humanity's place in the grand scheme of things. We've always believed that we are the masters of our fate, the conquerors of the stars. But what if we're wrong? What if, in trying to uncover the mysteries of space, we've unknowingly crossed a line that should never have been crossed? As they venture deeper into this forbidden zone, the crew begins to experience strange phenomena. Time seems to bend, and memories of things long forgotten begin to resurface. They see visions of an ancient power, one that once shaped the very fabric of the universe. And worse, they start to realize that creation itself remembers why it began, and it remembers why certain things must remain off limits. But the crew is undeterred, driven by the hope that they can unlock the answers that have eluded humanity for centuries. They think they can control the situation, but the deeper they go, the more they realize how little they truly understand about the forces they are tampering with. Soon they'll learn that some mysteries were never meant to be solved. The tension builds. With every passing moment, the crew finds themselves drawn closer to an answer that might shatter everything they thought they knew about existence. But as they approach the heart of the anomaly, one question lingers in the air. Will they uncover the truth, and if so, will they be able to survive it? Or will humanity's very existence be erased from the fabric of the universe, as if it was never meant to be? Stay tuned, because the truth may be more terrifying than they ever imagined. And the clock is ticking. The crew had trained for years, but nothing in their simulations prepared them for the quiet unease that settled over the ship after they crossed into the anomaly's outer edge. At first it felt like a shift in gravity, a soft pressure against the chest, the kind you get when you're about to hear something you weren't meant to know. No alarms went off, no warnings flashed, but everyone felt an instinctive awareness that something ancient had just taken notice of them. Back home, people called this region of space a myth, a superstition, a story told by old starfarers who claimed the universe held memories the way a person holds scars. Humanity had laughed it off at first. After all, they believed science could explain everything. But as the crew traveled deeper, even the most confident among them began to question whether they had misunderstood the limits of creation. The mission logs showed the first signs of trouble, strange readings, shifts in background radiation that didn't match anything known. The ship's scanners kept trying to label what it detected, but every result came back as indeterminate. It was as if the anomaly refused to be understood, like it was shielding something or hiding itself from their instruments. And the farther they went, the more the readings bent into patterns that felt almost intentional. One of the researchers mentioned that the shapes reminded him of ancient symbols, found on fragments of unknown origin, that had puzzled humanity for decades. Those symbols were thought to be marks from civilizations that existed long before humans learned to walk upright. But now, seeing similar patterns fold and unfold in the data made him wonder whether those civilizations had found this place too, and whether they had survived it. The crew gathered in the observation deck, staring at the swirling darkness outside. It wasn't empty. That was the most unsettling part. The space beyond the glass shimmered as if the stars themselves were trying to pull away, refusing to shine too close to the anomaly. Light didn't behave the way it should. It bent, hesitated, and vanished like it was afraid. The captain reminded them of the mission: uncover the truth behind the so-called forbidden zone, learn why creation seemed to avoid it, and determine whether humanity could make sense of it. But even the captain's voice held a quiet strain, the kind that hinted they were no longer sure what they were leading their crew into. Still, no one turned back. They reviewed old transmissions, searching for clues, messages from ships that had passed near this region long ago. Most were corrupted, scrambled beyond repair, but a few fragments remained clear enough to understand. A faint voice repeating the same words: "Turn away, it remembers." No further explanation, no coordinates, just that warning. The crew argued about it late into the ship's night cycle. Was it a message from a lost explorer, or something else, echoing across time? No one could say for certain, but the warning settled in their minds, growing heavier with every passing hour. The deeper they ventured, the more they sensed something watching, something patient, as if waiting to see what choice humanity would make next. And though no one spoke it aloud, they all felt the same thing. They weren't just traveling into a part of space. They were stepping into a memory the universe had locked away. For a reason. Yet the ship moved forward. Because now that they were here, turning back felt impossible, almost as if the anomaly itself wouldn't allow it. The deeper they went, the more the crew felt a creeping sense of dread. It wasn't just the physical space they were entering, but the atmosphere inside the ship had changed. There were odd, unexplainable occurrences, lights flickering, instruments going haywire, and strange noises echoing in the hallways that no one could place. The hum of the engines, once a comforting sound, now felt hollow, as if even the ship itself was unsure of what it was heading toward. At first, the team tried to stay focused on their mission, to gather data, document their findings, and push forward, but the tension was unmistakable. The sense of being watched was impossible to shake. Some of the crew members started having strange dreams, flashes of distant worlds, landscapes that twisted and bent, as if time and space weren't bound by the laws they knew. Others started hearing voices, barely audible whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Turn back, they would hear, sometimes in their own language, sometimes in something older, a language lost to human memory. The conflict on the ship began to surface in ways no one had expected. The lead scientist, a woman who had always prided herself on her logical, analytical mind, was the first to crack. She spent hours poring over the data, but the more she studied it, the less sense it made. The patterns weren't just random, they were deliberate. She began to feel that they weren't just investigating an anomaly, they were trespassing. It was as though the universe itself was sending a warning, one that had been ignored for too long. But even as she grappled with these thoughts, a part of her refused to give in to fear. She couldn't let doubt guide her now. Meanwhile, the ship's engineer, the one who always kept a level head in times of crisis, started to lose his composure. It wasn't the malfunctioning equipment or the flickering lights that unsettled him. It was something more fundamental. The stability of the ship itself. The hull seemed to be vibrating in ways it shouldn't, warping slightly, as though the space they were in was changing them. He checked the systems repeatedly, but each time he came up with nothing. No signs of stress, no structural problems. It was like the very fabric of their ship was being warped by the forces outside, and there was no way to stop it. At the same time, the captain, who had been resolute in their mission up until now, found himself torn between his duty to the crew and his growing instinct to turn back. He couldn't ignore the fact that there was something wrong, deeply wrong about this place. But the thought of abandoning the mission now, after everything they had come for, gnawed at him. What if they were the first to find something truly groundbreaking? What if this was the key to unlocking the greatest mysteries of the universe? The weight of that decision crushed him, and every time he tried to make a call, he found himself hesitating. Despite the growing unease, no one spoke openly about the fear that seemed to be spreading through the ship. It was as if they all knew that acknowledging it aloud would make it real. Instead, they focused on their work, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But as each day passed, the anomaly loomed larger in their minds, and the sense of being drawn toward it became undeniable. Then came the moment that would change everything. The ship's sensors detected a shift. A pulse, slow at first, then growing stronger, rippled through the fabric of space itself, as if something immense had stirred from its slumber. The readings were chaotic, disorienting, and they couldn't make sense of it. The entire ship seemed to tremble in response, as though it was being pulled into something it wasn't meant to touch. Panic began to set in, but it was no use. The ship was already too far inside, and the crew had no idea what would happen next. Outside, the stars had begun to distort, their light bending in unnatural arcs. It was as if the universe itself was being bent around them. For the first time, the captain allowed himself to speak the unspoken thought that had been haunting him. We're not just exploring this place. We're inside it now, and something is ... waiting, but waiting for what? None of them knew. All they could do was brace themselves for whatever came next. The crew was on edge, their nerves stretched thin as the ship's systems continued to malfunction. The lights flickered erratically, casting strange shadows across the walls. The hum of the engines had become a deep, resonant pulse, almost as if the ship itself was alive, vibrating in response to the growing force outside. It wasn't just the equipment failing, they could feel it. The air had thickened, the temperature rising despite the climate controls being set to normal. It was as if the very space around them was rejecting the presence of the ship, or worse, consuming it. The captain gathered the crew in the main control room, the tension in the air palpable. He had kept them moving forward, always believing that they could handle whatever came their way. But now, looking at the faces of his crew, he knew they were all silently wondering the same thing. What are we really dealing with? The lead scientist was pacing back and forth, muttering under her breath as she pored over the data again. The patterns had intensified, now forming coherent, repeating sequences, as though some intelligence was communicating in the only language they could understand, the language of the stars. But no matter how hard she tried to make sense of it, the results felt like a warning, an ancient warning wrapped in riddles. Her hands were trembling, and it wasn't just from the stress. She had seen something in the readings, something alive, a force, a consciousness, embedded in the very fabric of space itself. The engineer was at his station, his fingers dancing across the control panel as he attempted to stabilize the ship's systems, but it was useless. The hull had started to warp its shape, subtly shifting in ways he couldn't explain. He could feel it in his bones. The ship was becoming a part of the anomaly. The entire structure of the vessel was bending in response to something far beyond their comprehension, as if the ship was being remembered, like a forgotten object being pulled back into a long-forgotten fold of time. Outside, the stars had completely changed. They no longer looked like the bright, distant points of light they once were. Now, they seemed like fragments of some cosmic puzzle, twisting and spiraling in a way that was unsettlingly unnatural. It was as if the universe itself was unraveling, one stitch at a time. The crew stared out of the observation windows, helpless, as they watched the very fabric of reality warp and writhe in front of their eyes. The ship was in motion, but it didn't feel like they were moving through space. It felt more like they were being pulled into something that had been waiting for them. Then the sound came. At first it was subtle, almost inaudible, like a low hum from deep within the ship, but it grew louder, and soon it filled every corner of the vessel. It was a sound unlike anything they'd ever heard before, a noise that made the walls seem to tremble, like 1,000 voices crying out in unison, but not in pain, more like a warning, a desperate plea for something they couldn't understand. The ship's systems went completely haywire, as if they were being overridden by something external. The engineer tried to reroute power, but it was futile. They were no longer in control. The captain tried to maintain order, prepare for a full scan of the anomaly. "We need to figure out what's happening," he ordered, but his voice was shaky, betraying the fear he had kept hidden. The scientist was already working frantically at her station, her eyes wide with realization. "We've gone too far," she said, her voice trembling. "It's calling us. The anomaly isn't just a place, it's a consciousness, a mind older than anything we've ever known. And it remembers." The crew looked at her in stunned silence. The weight of her words hung in the air. The captain knew she was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a natural phenomenon. They weren't trespassing on a forgotten corner of space. They had stumbled into something alive, something that had been here long before humanity had ever set foot on a starship. And now, it was awake. The pulsing sound outside grew louder. The fabric of space itself seemed to ripple in waves, warping even more violently. Reality felt as though it was splintering at the edges, threatening to tear apart. Panic rippled through the crew, but no one moved. They couldn't move. It was like the ship was no longer theirs to command. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The noise ceased. The ship fell into an eerie silence, so profound that the crew's breathing sounded deafening. For a moment, they thought they had escaped. Maybe the anomaly had decided to let them go. But then the darkness outside the windows deepened, as if the stars themselves were being swallowed whole. The captain's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" But no one had an answer. The pull was stronger than ever before. Something was coming, and this time they had no idea what it would do. The silence in the ship was suffocating. The crew sat frozen, unsure whether they should feel relief or dread. For a long moment, there was no sign of the anomaly, no pulsing light, no distortion in space. Outside the observation windows, the stars hung still, their unnatural warping suddenly gone. The ship drifted in eerie calm, as if the very universe had decided to take a breath. But that calm didn't last. It started as a small vibration, so faint at first that no one was sure they were feeling it at all. Then it grew, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It rattled through the ship's bones, reverberating in the walls, the floor, the very air they breathed. It was a sound that felt ancient, a sound that stirred something primal within them, as if the ship itself was being reawakened by some force beyond their comprehension. The captain turned toward the control panel, his fingers hovering over the comms, unsure of what to say. The hum continued to grow, louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound, now it was a presence. Something was pushing against them, urging them forward, pulling them deeper into the heart of the anomaly. The lead scientist stood, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "It's not just watching us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's trying to communicate." Before anyone could respond, the ship's display blinked to life. The readouts were chaotic, flashing red with data they couldn't decipher. But amid the scrambled numbers and scrambled lines of code, one thing stood out, a message. It wasn't in any language the crew knew, but it was unmistakable. The symbols were ancient, some of them they recognized from archaeological digs on distant worlds, but others were completely alien. They seemed to pulse and shift in real time, like living patterns folding and unfolding before their eyes. The scientist's face drained of color as she read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You have awakened what should never be awoken. The cycle is incomplete." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The crew stared at her, their faces filled with confusion and terror. What cycle? What had they done? They had thought they were exploring the unknown, but now it seemed like they had opened a door that should have remained sealed forever. Then the vibration intensified, and the ship shuddered violently, as if struck by an invisible hand. The lights flickered once again, and the walls seemed to bend, distorting in ways that defied physics. Outside, the stars twisted into spirals, their light bending into strange, impossible shapes. And then, the ship jolted as if it had collided with something. The entire crew was thrown to the floor, their bodies slammed into the hard surfaces as the ship lurched and groaned in protest. Panic spread like wildfire, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the captain felt his mind unravel. The ship wasn't just trapped in the anomaly anymore. It was in it, tethered to whatever force lay at the center. "Get us out of here," someone shouted, but the control panel flickered and died. The screens went black, and the hum outside grew louder, more menacing. It was as if the anomaly was alive, wrapping its tendrils around the ship, unwilling to let go. The scientist was already at her console, typing rapidly. "The data, it's changing. The patterns, they're shifting faster now, like it's adapting to us," she muttered, her face pale. "We've triggered something. We don't know what it is, but we're not supposed to be here. We were never supposed to be here." The captain's voice broke through the chaos. "What's happening to the ship?" "The fabric of space is warping," the engineer replied, his voice tight with panic. "The anomaly is rewriting the laws of reality around us. We're caught in its field, and if we don't get out, we'll be lost forever." As the ship shook again, a new set of symbols appeared on the display, this time in perfect clarity. They were not random this time, but a message, one that was painfully clear. It was a countdown. The cycle must begin. 0. Initiating reset. Time seemed to stop. The crew realized too late that they hadn't just disturbed the anomaly, they had activated something. The anomaly wasn't a place, it was a process. An ancient mechanism designed to reset, to erase, to undo everything that had ever dared to trespass, and now, they were part of it. The countdown on the screen ticked away, and the hum reached a fever pitch. The captain stared at the crew, knowing that the ship was no longer their only concern. Whatever this thing was, whatever they had awoken, it was going to take everything they had known and force them to face something far worse than death. With the countdown ticking down and the fabric of reality tearing around them, the crew was left with one final question. Would they survive the reset? Or would they become another forgotten memory in the vast, unyielding universe? The countdown echoed in the cabin, a relentless tick-tock that sliced through the chaos. Each second felt heavier, like the weight of the universe itself was pressing in on them. The crew stood frozen, staring at the display, helpless as the symbols flashed before their eyes. 0. Initiating reset. The finality of the words was suffocating. Their fates were sealed, and there was nothing left to do but watch as time unraveled. The ship shook violently again, and the hum outside became a deafening roar, as if the fabric of reality itself was screaming in pain. The walls creaked, the floor buckled, and everything around them seemed to stretch and distort, bending in impossible ways. The engineer's hands flew across the controls in a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, but it was useless. The ship had become a part of the anomaly, its fate now tied to the countdown. "What is this thing?" the scientist whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing roar. She stood in front of the display, her eyes wide with the realization that they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. "It's not a place, it's a mechanism designed to reset everything, erase history, rewrite time itself. Then what happens to us?" The captain's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. The thought of being erased, of becoming nothing, sent a cold shiver through him. "I don't know," the scientist replied, her voice trembling, "but we can't let it finish. If we don't stop it now, it won't just be us. It'll be everything. Everything we know, every star, every planet. It'll all be rewritten." The engineer turned to the captain, his face pale with panic. "I've got one shot at this, one chance to override the system and stop the reset, but I need you to hold on. We need to hold on while I make the change." The captain nodded grimly. "Do it. We'll hold the line." The hum outside intensified, shaking the very core of the ship as the countdown neared its final moments. Time itself seemed to distort, stretching and contracting, as if reality were on the edge of collapse. In the control room, the crew worked together in tense silence, their focus sharp despite the fear gnawing at their minds. The engineer's hands moved like lightning, trying to bypass the security protocols and reprogram the reset mechanism. But each time he made a breakthrough, the system countered, throwing up a new wall, a new lock. "Almost there," he muttered, sweat pouring down his face. "Just a few more seconds, ... And then, just as the countdown reached its final moment, something unexpected happened. The ship lurched violently, throwing everyone to the floor. A crackling sound filled the air, and a blinding flash of light burst through the observation windows. The stars outside twisted into a brilliant, chaotic whirlpool of light, folding in on themselves like a cosmic vortex. The countdown stopped and then rewound. The crew gasped in shock as the display flickered, showing the countdown resetting, but now it was counting backward in time. The hum outside faded, replaced by a strange, eerie silence. What just happened? The captain's voice was hoarse, filled with disbelief. The engineer stared at the controls, his mouth hanging open in shock. I don't know. I didn't do that. Then, from the depths of the anomaly, a voice resonated through the ship, not over the speakers, but inside their minds, as if it came from the very core of the universe itself. It was ancient, filled with the weight of millennia, yet somehow familiar. You should not have come, the voice intoned, but you are part of the cycle now, and you will never leave. The crew froze, realizing the horrifying truth. They hadn't stopped the reset. They had become part of it. The anomaly wasn't just an external force. It was a process, a system that existed to preserve the balance of the universe. And the moment they had crossed into its domain, they had triggered something much larger than they could understand. The engineer's voice cracked. We're not in the present anymore, are we? The scientist turned her eyes wide with realization. No, we're in the past. Or maybe the future. We're outside of time itself now. The anomaly. It has taken us beyond the boundaries of history. We're caught in its cycle. Suddenly, the ship lurched again, but this time, it wasn't a violent shake, it was a shift. The stars outside the windows twisted, not in chaotic spirals, but into clear geometric patterns. As if the ship were being pulled through layers of time, through different versions of the universe. The crew watched in awe and terror as they saw alternate versions of their ship, their mission alternate realities where they had succeeded, failed, or never even existed. And then, the final twist hit them. The countdown had not been to stop the reset, it had been to trigger it. The anomaly had chosen them, had pulled them into its cycle to preserve the balance. They hadn't been trying to escape history. They had become part of its newest unwitting guardians. But there was no escape. They were now bound to the anomaly forever. And as the ship hurtled through the folds of time, they realized the most chilling truth of all. They were never meant to leave. The ship drifted in the timeless expanse, its engines silent, its crew lost to the fold of history. As they sailed through the endless cycles of the anomaly, the stars outside were no longer stars at all. They were glimpses, fragments of possible futures, or perhaps distant pasts, depending on how one looked at it. The crew could no longer be certain whether they were traveling forward or backward in time. What they knew now was that they were trapped within a loop, a cycle that had no beginning and no end. The captain stood at the observation window, staring into the swirling patterns of light and shadow. His mind had long since given up trying to comprehend what was happening. The universe, as he had once understood it, was no longer a constant. It was a shifting, formless entity, a web of possibilities, and they were caught in its center. He knew the truth now. Their mission had never been about discovery. It had been about fate. They had been chosen, or perhaps destined, to be part of something far greater than themselves. Beside him, the lead scientist was hunched over the control panel, her fingers gliding over the ancient data streams. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as if she was staring at a truth she could never unsee. The patterns on the screen were no longer random but had become a map one she had only begun to understand. They were no longer just travelers. They were witnesses, part of a grand cycle that had been unfolding for eons. The anomaly was not just a force of nature. It was a consciousness, a cosmic mechanism that governed the flow of time and space, ensuring that the universe remained in balance. As the days passed, or was it weeks, or years, time no longer had meaning. Something in her mind snapped into place. She finally understood the message they had received earlier. You have awakened what should never be awoken. The cycle is incomplete. The cycle wasn't just about the anomaly resetting reality, it was about the preservation of the universe itself. And they, the crew, were part of its final stage. The anomaly had chosen them not because it wanted to destroy them, but because it needed them to preserve its delicate balance. The engineer, who had long ago stopped trying to fix the ship, now spent his days staring into the swirling abyss of time. He, too, had accepted their fate. They had become part of the anomaly cycle, and nothing they did would change that. He had tried to escape, tried to force the systems to respond, but it was futile. The ship, like them, was now part of a greater, incomprehensible whole. There was no outside anymore. The crew had been subsumed by the anomaly, as if they were threads woven into the fabric of the cosmos, forever intertwined with the universe's deepest mysteries. One day, the scientist approached the captain with a quiet resolve in her eyes. "We're not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady. "And we never will. We've become part of the anomaly, part of the cycle that holds the universe together." The captain didn't answer at first. He stared out at the endless stream of possibilities, each one a version of what could have been, what could still be. The universe was vast and they were now part of its infinite layers. He realized that their journey, while terrifying, had led them to the truth that no one had ever understood. The universe was not a linear path, but an ever-shifting, ever-changing force. And they, the crew of the starship, were now both the custodians and the witnesses of this truth. As the ship drifted further into the fold of time, the crew slowly began to understand their role. They were not to be forgotten. They were not lost. They were part of the story of the universe, now embedded in the cycle of existence. Time, space, and reality had been bent around them. and they had become something more, something beyond human understanding. There would be no grand rescue, no sudden escape, no miraculous return to their past lives. The captain, the scientist, the engineer, all of them had become the guardians of a truth that no one else would ever know. They were now part of the universe's great reset, a mechanism that ensured the stability of existence itself. And as they sailed on through the vast unknown, they understood one final thing. Their journey had not been in vain. They had not come here by mistake. They had been chosen not to escape, but to become the eternal witnesses forever tied to the endless cycles of the universe. The universe would continue, and so would they, bound to its mysteries for all eternity. In the end, the crew had discovered the greatest truth of all, that sometimes the greatest adventure isn't about finding a way home, it's about discovering where you truly belong. And for them, that place was now the heart of the universe itself.